So I think throughout history, if you go back to Aristotle, Stoics, emotion was seen as a bad thing, and we often saw emotion as equated to the animals, and we had reason that transcended our animal instincts. And so what made us uniquely human was we were rational, we were intelligent. So nowadays we have these machines that are more rational, more intelligent, perhaps in certain circumstances than we are. And you've actually seen a shift in the way we define and measure and talk about what makes us uniquely human. We often see emotion as what makes us separate and transcend the machine. So actually, what we're seeing now, and then I guess my work to some extent, is we're giving the emotions to the machine, but that allows them, in some sense, to be more, at least in this film, uniquely human.
So I figured we would start. I just read all of this, but I figured if you could, in layman's terms, walk us through briefly what it is that your research is focused on.
Sure. I mean, I guess in layman's terms, I try to teach AI to have emotions, which is, I guess, relevant to this movie. More specifically, um, my field explores how can we get machines to understand human emotion. So that means recognizing what someone might feel from their facial expressions or the situation they're in, predicting how emotion might shape how people make decisions, and then also trying to make a machine like a robot that could use emotions to shape how interaction unfolds.
So yes, very apt for the film that we just watched. Uh, my first instinct is to ask whether it's accurate, whether what we watched is accurate, but I figure that might be too broad. So maybe was there an element, a specific scene or a moment that felt resonant to the kind of research in your field?
Sure. I mean, there's several layers. I guess one of the things at a broad level that the film represents is in many ways the way we train artificial intelligence systems to be intelligent. So you're probably, when most people think of GPT now when they think of AI, and of course AI is more than that, but the way they train GPT and other what are called large language models is very similar in some ways to what we saw here. So at one level, you train what's called the base model, which you basically let it watch the internet, and so it's just passively soaking up all this information and learning statistical correlations between what follows what. And really, at that level, all it's being trained to do is predict the next word. And that's the kind of first step. We call that the base model. But then it needs to learn to interact. And so with a large language model like with AI, GPT, what you do is it's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. But the basic idea is you get a bunch of humans to interact with the model and say, I like that, I don't like that. And then we actually learn a model of the humans, and then you run a simulation where those two models interact over and over and over and over and over again. And so, in a sense, that we saw that exactly in the movie. So, in the movie, they start watching movies, right? They're soaking up information about humans from the internet, but then at some point they start to interact, and so there was, and through that interaction, they in some sense learn and evolve and become something greater than what they were before.
Yeah, there's this the iterative process, especially when they're like doing date night, what feels like and probably was millions and millions of times. It struck me that maybe that was they were learning just this one thing, but it's only when that sequence is sort of broken or open that the language models can, or like these artificial intelligence, this buoy and the satellite sort of learn more. Um, it would that be a kind of breakthrough? Is the kind of thing that you're always hoping to achieve to get that?
Yeah, and I think it's actually interesting to frame that in terms of emotion, because if you study what emotion does for people, and there's arguments among certain AI people, myself included, that something like emotion is necessary for any intelligent entity. And so what emotions do often is they break us out of our patterns. So we may be, so you saw in the movie they're stuck in a certain pattern, and then actually it was the emotions that broke them out of that pattern. So as Liam, I think, is the man, he gets frustrated and angry. She gets upset and depressed, but that emotional processes break this kind of cyclical pattern over and over again and transcend them and take them to a new level.
Which strikes me as I was watching this film. Um, it feels of a piece with a lot of recent movies that tackle AI that have put emotion and put love in particular, I think, at the center. I think something like Her, even something like Ex Machina. I keep thinking of Wally, right? Like that. It strikes me that these are kind of novel or new ways of telling the story that I think before um before this we were talking about like we tended to have this association with AI of it being cold and intellectual, but do you think this is in response to the research, or do we think storytelling and science are sort of converging, or are they speaking to each other in that sense?
I'm not sure, but what you touch on, there's been a shift in how we as humans think about emotion and whether how it relates to what's to be uniquely human. So I think throughout history, if you go back to Aristotle, the Stoics, emotion was seen as a bad thing, and we often saw emotion as equated to the animals, and we had reason that transcended our animal instincts. And so what made us uniquely human was we were rational, we were intelligent. So nowadays we have these machines that are more rational, more intelligent, perhaps in certain circumstances than we are. And you've actually seen a shift in the way we define and measure and talk about what makes us uniquely human. We often see emotion as what makes us separate and transcend the machines. So we hold on to our emotions now and see the emotions as providing a benefit. And so actually what we're seeing now, and then I guess my work to some extent is we're giving the emotions to the machine, but that allows them in some sense to be more, at least in this film, uniquely human.
How I just want to ask, how hard is that to give a machine emotion? Or how easy, I guess.
Uh, I mean, I think it's very easy to. I think people anthropomorphize these machines, and they read a lot of capabilities into models like GPT, and we often see them as having emotions. And in many ways, they can talk about emotions better than we can. People often are going out to ask GPT, how can I, improve myself? How can I deal with certain emotional tasks? And it can beautifully tell us those terms, but in fact, it doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have any goals. I mean, its goal is literally just to say the next word. And so, I think what makes humans and animals in general different is we have goals, we have curiosity, we have things like emotion that get us out of these sort of simple patterns. And so, no, it's not particularly easy. I mean, there's a lot of research trying to give in some sense these machines their own goals, their own sense of curiosity, but we're I think pretty far from that.
Right, and as you were talking about anthropomorphizing, this is precisely what the film sort of does, right? Like we begin with a buoy and a satellite, and as you pointed out, we begin with sort of like a kind of text mimicry, and then she creates this avatar, and then he creates this avatar, and then we slowly move into this like live action, real life, photoreal sort of version of reality that they've created. Um, Are there ways of imagining artificial intelligence, or do we think it's harder to imagine what they could look like or be like if they were not human?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, I think that whenever we envision aliens, they're always some sense like us, and I think ultimately AI will be completely different. I mean, if we look right now at the way the models learn, they're completely different than the way people learn. So we begin our lives. We can't speak, and we interact with the world, and we can rapidly learn from a few examples, and then we learn language, and then we can have culture and communication. So AI, it learns from language. It has no body, it has no physiology, and so in some sense, it's a very alien, different kind of beast. And it'll be kind of interesting as these techniques evolve to see, what form they will ultimately take. But I think when we eventually achieve artificial intelligence, it will be nothing like human intelligence.
Right, which then makes these films and these sort of depictions of AI they end up just mirroring ourselves, right? Like this is a story about AI, but it's a story really about human emotion and how hard a relationship is. Because sometimes you're very different, and that can mean like you're a buoy and I'm a satellite. Or, um, what do you find in these films when you're watching? What are you taking away from them?
I mean, I guess always. I mean, as a scientist, I like sci-fi because it often takes an idea that's potentially possible within in recent, in the near future. Particularly think things like Black Mirror, and then just explore, what would that technology do to us? How does it transform humanity to have this capacity? And then that allows you to kind of envision the different kinds of futures. Some maybe you really don't want to have. I mean, this was actually a nice kind of future, right? I mean, humans are all dead, but but
Right.
we live on through our children. Uh, uh, so I think sci-fi in general gives us a way to kind of uh, forecast and predict and potentially, correct the way we're approaching development of technology.
I was mostly impressed that a billion years into the future, the satellite would still be up and going, and a buoy would continue to be working. Um, that's quite optimistic that a technology would last that long, that it wouldn't sort of crash and burn. Um, Looking at this film, was there an element to it that led you to think like, oh, that's exciting. That's something to aspire to.
I mean, I think I mean, coming from just more of a technical standpoint, when I watched this movie twice because they gave it to us before, and it is actually saw very different layers in the second time through. And one of the things when I first watched the movie that struck me was when you think about emotion, emotion is really about our bodies. Emotion prepares us to act in a complex world. It activates physiology and muscles so that we can approach certain challenges. And when I first watched the film, um, I didn't. I thought it struck me a little flat because they're machines. They don't have physiology. They don't have hearts. And but what on the second reading was kind of interesting is to see, um, even when they're robots, you're seeing actually things like physiology in the machine. So particularly in humans, when we get excited or aroused, our pupils dilate. That's sympathetic nervous system activation, and you're seeing in some sense these machines have a physiology, and as machines get more complicated, and actually in my class, I use an example of NASA spacecraft. So NASA spacecraft that say goes to Cassini that goes to Saturn has something like a physiology because it's only got limited power, and it has to do these different tasks. Maybe it has to warm up its motors to be able to do certain things and shut other things off. And so that's really a physiology, and so they do actually have a body and they have a physiology to build on. And so in some sense they have the sort of ingredients of emotion. So that kind of excited me on the second watching.
Yeah, the thing that I watched that I recognize more in the second is how what they end up building towards are these sensory reactions, right? Like, what does water taste like? What does water feel like? This delicious ice cream that I just made, which both feel so absurd because they're, again,
Graphical characters.
right. And also like there's like your buoy. How do you know what water tastes like? But it struck me like that might be a horizon that I would never have imagined a kind of artificial intelligence would be aiming toward. Am I just unimaginative in that sense? Like,
No, I mean, I guess what was weird in that sense is that it's all in a simulation, right? So all those, I mean, apparently they're living in a very sophisticated physics world that some game developers built that actually has all this kind of feedback that they can learn from. Because ultimately, we as humans, we learn from interacting with the real world. So they're learning in some kind of game world, but yet apparently sophisticated enough to help them reach the next level.
and a game world that's been based on YouTube vlogging, which is also I kept thinking it was like, what would have happened if they were watching like Hollywood movies, but instead they're watching these like performances of normalcy, a performance of a relationship, and it had me wondering whether that was also the key in the film, which is they're constantly trying to figure out authenticity,
Hmm.
which strike me as a hard concept for an artificial intelligence to grasp, because they would need to figure out, this is what we do normally. We know when someone is lying, or maybe we can tell,
Yeah.
but that's where they get stuck. Oh, your laugh isn't genuine.
Genuine. Yeah.
Didn't you find these two babies laughing so funny? Or I'm trying to tickle you, but they laugh.
Yeah. And actually, on the second read, second watching the film, there's actually a little bit in the beginning when they talk about what is smart, the smart buoy. Smart stands, I forget, was self-reflective. But okay, what does it say?
Self-monitoring, analyzing, and reporting technology.
Yeah. So what they're basically, I mean, that's one of the things machines, AI in general lack. So GPT doesn't, and these other large language models, they don't have self-reflection. They don't really learn from on top of themselves. And they had this the little scene there where they kind of explained how this AI, this buoy's AI, allows it to reflect upon itself and rewrite itself, to change itself in certain ways. And so that kind of actually was a kind of key moment that actually I missed on the first reading, that kind of explained how these things plausibly, from a kind of scientific perspective, could get better. And one thing relating to the Sloan Foundation, it's good to hear Sloan is putting science into YouTube, so that's going to help these guys be better.
Yeah. They'll have better vloggers to call from and to learn. They're also learning through millions and millions of years, which I think is also a difficult thing for us to grasp. Like, maybe if we do give an artificial intelligence a billion years, we have no idea what they'll be building or thinking or creating.
So we actually, through culture, learn, well, not million, but hopefully. Uh,
Ideally, we do learn. I want to give some time for audience questions, and we are currently blinded by the lights. So, if you do have a question for Dr. Gratch, we'll start here because I can see you right clearly. So the question is for everyone in the back, in case you didn't hear, how does this depiction of AI compare to Spielberg's um, artificial intelligence AI film in the way that they're going to become us?
yeah, and it's been a while since I've watched that film. I mean, they start with a very anthropomorphic, human-like robot that plays the role of a boy. I forget how they, if it learned like,
Well, at the end of the movie, the AI are completely like alien creatures who are almost see
uh,
humans as ancient artifacts that they're trying to save
right.
the
So
world.
in the movie, actually the AI continues to evolve, and they actually use the boy as a way, in some sense, to understand what it was like to be human, because that original AI was modeled after us, and they've gone on and transcend us. In this movie, really, they're learning literally entirely from us, and all the content online. So in some sense, they have no choice, but in some sense, to be like us. Where presumably, in that movie, they've gone on to the next generation to become something completely different.
Do you have another question? And I think we have a mic to hand out. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'm curious about what you said about like AI's looping and getting stuck in these loops. And I think like we saw that with like Bing a couple years ago, like the Yahoo AI, and it got into this like love loop or whatever, but it's not actually love, right? So I'm curious, like you in your research, you said you're like emotion gets us out of loops. Are you kind of applying that methodology or that like perspective onto AIs to get them like out of loops, or like how do you get them out?
Yeah, they're stuck in the loop. I think. I mean, that actually is very old. When the dawn of AI, it was kind of interesting, the history of AI, because in the very beginning, it came out of this meeting in the 50s, Dartmouth conference. And it was interesting to see that emotion was very central at that time to how people thought about AI. And as AI developed, it really became rational, based on decision theory and logic and probability. And emotion was seen as like this thing that would, well, why would you want to add that to a machine? But the beginning of that era, there was a famous Nobel Prize winning behavioral economist, Herb Simon, wrote a paper about why AI has to have emotion. And the idea was that, um, is exactly that people, and you see this actually in, so at USC, and we have a famous a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, that studies when people don't have emotion. And so if they have damage in the prefrontal cortex, what you'll see is people perseverate and they get stuck in loops. So if you ask them, where should we go for a restaurant? It's like, well, I could do this or I could do this, and they keep sort of sub-goaling, and they never kind of pop out and come up to a decision. And that was what Herb Simon's insight was, is a lot of the way that we thought of AI reasoning systems is they keep sub-goaling and they don't know when this is an unfruitful path and they have to pop out and try something different. And in some sense, for humans, that's what emotion does. And you saw that in the movie when they got in this loop, and then the emotion took over and they got bored or angry or depressed. Actually, I don't do that at work, unfortunately. But that's a good reminder. Maybe I should go back to that.
Just insert emotion wherever you want.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? We have one over here.
Hey, Dr. Gratch. So if you think embodiment and emotion are kind of key to expanding intelligence and such capabilities, does that mean like if you stick an AI or an LLM on top of a robot, it could kind of create like feedback sensor loops that emotion could spontaneously arise from a system like that?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I don't. I definitely think you need embodiment to advance intelligence, and that's really what's lacking. I mean, they're really at the core, the current shiny new tool, these foundational LLM models are just passively learning, and then you put a little bit of interaction on top of it. I mean, this is one area that people have a lot of interest in. They call it agentic AI. So I think what they really mean by that is let's give LLMs Bitcoin so they can hire people to do stuff in the world. But I think ultimately you really need this kind of tight interactivity, and some of that is like through conversation. So that mostly this movie's through conversation. So in some of my work, we try to build agents that can have dialogue. And the way they have to do that, they can't just learn passively by watching dialogue. They have to try it out. And so you create these simulations where they can try it out with each other. Because these current models, they need to do things a billion times, literally, to learn something. But as you get to do things in a real world, that really pops you out of the simulation, you're forced to confront with real physics, and you have to deal with a lot of the complexity. So I don't know the current generation of models. I don't think it's as simple as tying them to that, but that's, I think, a fundamental aspect of pretty much any intelligent entity is it can has to deal with a real time complex environment, and that really pushes the demands to become intelligent.
Okay. Oh, we have a lot of questions. I don't know if we're going to get through all of them, but maybe we have time for two more. The lady at the back.
Hello. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the ethical implications of giving human emotions to AI, and especially how that relates to the arts. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I don't know if there's a single meaning as what it means to give emotions to AI. I think a lot of the ethical concerns, I mean, actually, within the European Union, there's what's put out called the AI Act, and they banned certain kind of emotion technology for fear that it has high risks. And there, the basic concern is that they don't want machines to read people's emotions when the people maybe not consent to wanting their emotions read. And the main concern there is governments or organizations could use that to exploit their employees. I think that's a part of the story, but also emotion is something we project intentionally out into the world to communicate with each other. And so, actors are portraying emotions even though they don't feel them, and that's an important way to evoke things in the audience. And if you want to have virtual actors that can do things like actors, they have to, in some sense, be able to understand and utilize emotions like people. From a app, that in the arts, I think it's different than if you think of industry. So industry, I mean, where do we use emotion in marketing, right? So you use emotion to manipulate people to buy popcorn at the movies or to buy new cars. And certainly AI can be really good at that. And part of my research is showing how AI could use emotions to persuade people to, exercise more, improve their mental health, but also the same technology leads people to do whatever you want to persuade them to do. And so there's a lot of concern about manipulative systems. I think probably my bigger concern though is that I think there's these rise of AI boyfriend girlfriend, so people are turning to the AI to satisfy something in their relationships. And in our research we've shown that um, you know mo- being with another person is kind of like a hunger. So you crave to be social. We're social organisms who crave to be social, but you can have that craving satisfied by going on Facebook. You can have that craving satisfied by talking to an AI that seems to be emotional, and then you're less hungry. So then you don't go out and connect to real people. And so what I'm seeing a bigger concern, and Sherry Turkle at MIT has been written some books about this. That we're seeing people turn to AI for relationships rather than humans, and the AI can be, oh, you're great, you're self-affirming, but real relationships confront us with challenges and force us to grow as people. We were talking the movie Her. One view of the movie Her actually is her uh, uh, confronts Theodore and forces him to learn as a person, and then she leaves him, and then he has to go back and connect back with people. But I don't think that's the way we're going to if your company, you want to market a virtual girlfriend, you don't want that, girlfriend to make you feel small and bad or force you to grow. You want it to just say, oh, you're great, you're wonderful, right? And so that's my greatest concern, is that we'll turn to these kind of shallow, not real relationships, but yet still are designed to satisfy our psychological needs that turn us away from actually growing and learning with each other.
Yeah, which in a way is also how we end in this film. That there's like the EM really wants me, and it's always so weird to talk about the character as me. EM wants me to be better at being me. I have to imagine the filmmakers really, really enjoyed the fact that those are the sentences that we get to utter when talking about their film. I think we have a question. Time for one more question, and I'm going to go back to this side. It's right over here, sir.
Is this working? Yeah. I was wondering, when you ask a question of ChatGPT and then you give additional prompts, do the additional prompts, is that a way of to inserting the humanity? Is the AI taking your additional prompts and starting to become adaptive to the human input?
I mean, you have to read the terms of agreement carefully. Usually, usually not. The answer is no. So when you interact with GPT, so GPT's been called a pre-trained model, and so it's all the kind of weights on it are fixed and frozen, and then they can add new information later and retrain it. But when you prompt it, we call this in-context learning. So basically all the information that you've been talking to at that moment, depends how big the context is. It's a certain number of tokens. They're getting bigger all the time, but it basically adapts and changes and learns in the moment, in a sense, to what's in the context. So you might bring up a concept, and then it knows about that concept as you continue this conversation, and it changes the way it talks, and that's actually sometimes gets in the way. So it's useful to often create a new context when you start. Like I use it for science, and so you bring up something, and then it's always trying to connect the next query back to the last thing I said, and that causes a lot of problems, what we call hallucinations. That said, they are now trying to create memories. So this came out about 6 months ago, I think, in OpenAI's work, where they'll look at some of the things you say and then kind of cache it into a memory. And then now when you open up a new context, it brings in that information. And then that becomes part of that context, and it changes the way it behaves. But that's not, I think, to get to your question, it's not changing the fundamental model. It's changing a little bit about what's in the context when you interact with it in the moment. Um, And so currently the way it learns to interact better is not by learning from us. Well, they don't exactly tell us what they do with the information, but I think ultimately that will be what was be required. Of course, that raises ethical and privacy issues, and right now people are giving all kinds of information and consenting to giving all kinds of intimate information about themselves to these models that they probably don't realize what they're doing. But ultimately, I think it has to learn through an interaction. It's just the technology is not quite there yet.
Well, I think we could continue having endless, fascinating conversations. And I think that speaks to this conversation, but also the film and sort of the topics that we've been reaching today. So thank you, first of all of you, for staying behind for this conversation. And join me in thanking Dr. Gratch